All right, good morning. Good to be with you. So thanks for stopping by to talk about whether your work matters to God. My name is Joe Holt. I've been teaching here in the business school since 2004. I do courses in ethics. I do a course in spirituality of work, which is kind of where this comes from. Before that, in a previous lifetime, I was a Jesuit seminarian priest for about 12 years. Studied scripture over in Rome for a couple of years. Came back, and as a Jesuit, I had taught business ethics. So how do people connect Sunday with Monday to Friday was something that interested me from my early 20s. I found that when I spoke to people with a background in philosophy, theology, scripture, they give me a polite hearing, but there'd always be a smile that said, you have no idea what it's actually like. So friends of mine on Wall Street said, you've taught about that stuff for years, why don't you see what it's like? So I did a brief stint as a stockbroker, then I was a corporate attorney in Chicago firms for about 5-6 years. Then I directed a clinic on entrepreneurship at the University of Chicago, helping low-income folks get self-sufficient by starting up growing businesses. Then I had an opportunity to come here, and the main attraction to me was University of Chicago is a fine place, but I want to do some things faith-related. So this is obviously a fantastic place for doing that. And you will forgive me, I'm a Boston College graduate, but I'm kind of adopted. So when those two teams play and they ask me who you're cheering for, I say I wish both teams well, though not equally well. So that's anyway. But this is a topic kind of very near and dear to my heart. I want to get into this question itself, but before that, I want to start off by asking a couple of prior things. So how clear or strong a message do you get in U.S. society that your work is important? So, if you were from some other country and you came to the U.S. to visit and you had a rate on a scale of 1 to 10, how much importance do these people place on work, where 1 is none at all and 10 is it's the most important thing? Where would you put it? So when you retire, it's in one place, and when you're working, it's another. What's interesting is that some people find in retirement that it's still important because to the extent you have defined yourself by the work you do, then retirement becomes kind of difficult to navigate. Then, if I was a corporate attorney, an accountant, a surgeon, whatever, then who am I now that I'm not doing that thing? Can become a challenge for some folks. Was for my dad, he was a chiropractor, but he kind of, worked 12, 14 hours a day, like 6 days a week. And I always said if he retired, he would die. And less than a year after he retired, he died. So that was kind of his work. When people would ask him how much he worked, he would say only a half day, meaning 12 hours. Anyway, anybody else on how important is work in U.S. society? And what are the messages you get one way or the other about that? Yeah. Right. By the time you can walk, you kind of asked all of that. What do you ask them when you're kind of out and about in a new town, meeting people socially? What's like usually? What do you do? Excuse me?
I've been trying to avoid asking that question on weekend because I think it gets annoying. This is the point of the person sometimes.
Yeah, I tried, after I left the Jesuits, I tried like variations of the question, like, so what matters to you? But it didn't work so well. Because the interesting thing is that people ask you, what do you do? And then when you answer it, they think they have some sense of who you are. And maybe they do, maybe they don't. But, who you are and what you care about is actually a very different thing. And it's interesting for me because I've been, I started out as a gym teacher, doing volunteer work in my native Bronx. I was a Jesuit seminarian priest. I was a stockbroker, as a corporate attorney, and now I'm a professor here. So the reactions I get when I answer, what do you do? They're very different, but I've always been the same person. So to me, that's kind of interesting. So on one hand, I think we get a really strong message that work matters a lot. There's an extent to which many of us tend to define ourselves by the work that we do. The other question, though, is how strong a message do you get that your work matters from a faith perspective? And whatever, judging by the fact of where you're sitting, I'm saying a fair number of you are Catholic, but whatever your faith is. It's interesting because the priest had to be on the altar. Now I'm in the last row with my people from the front.
Yeah, I don't think we really get that clear message from most people. So, for example, if you go to church and you listen to sermons, sometimes the priests talk about your work and what you do at your work and how you behave at your work, but not really very often.
And not very often, and in my experience, not very kind of compellingly. Not very. When's the last time you heard a really good, strong sermon about the importance of faith to the work that you're doing, Monday to Friday? I don't honestly. I've never heard one. Other than one I've given, I've never heard one. But that's what most people are doing, and it's interesting to me, having studied Scripture, because people experience Jesus as someone who spoke with authority. And I think part of that was that he seemed to really understand who they were and what their lives were like. And a lot of that is, to the best of our knowledge, he lived among us 30 to 33 years. We lose him at the age of 12 when he stays behind in the temple. Next time we see him, he's 30, and it's when John the Baptist is beheaded and the public ministry begins. So to the best of our knowledge, between 12 and 30, he was a carpenter in a little village. I always tell the business students, by the way, that there is no evidence whatsoever that he gave away the stuff he made. So it's actually kind of in business. But anyway. But he wasn't John the Baptist out in the desert, kind of by himself. He was in a busy little town interacting with people. And so when he talked to fishermen, he talked about nets. And when he talked to farmers, he talked about sowing and seeds. He kind of understood people's lives. I think part of the problem from our pulpits today is that the people giving the sermons don't have that connection of what are lives of these people like. What's it like to be in the work world? What's it like to raise children, be in a family, all that kind of a thing. So I think that part of the difficulty with this whole faith and work thing is that on the one hand, we get this really strong message that our work matters, but we're not getting a strong message that it matters from a faith perspective, so we're not inclined to think about it from a faith perspective. There isn't a whole lot kind of encouraging us to do that. There's this distinction that Thomas Green is a Jesuit spiritual writer, and he makes this distinction between working for God and doing God's work that I find very helpful. It's based on the story of Martha and Mary in Luke 10. And I'm going to read that for you for a moment. And what I want you to pay attention to is both Martha and Mary are concerned to do something for Jesus. What is the difference between what one does and what the other does, is what I want you to think about. Now, as they went on their way, he entered a village, and a woman named Martha received him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she went to him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things. One thing is needful. Mary has chosen the good portion, which shall not be taken away from her." So what's the difference? They both love Jesus. They're both concerned to do something for Jesus. What's the difference between what they do? And by the way, most of us see more than a little Martha in ourselves. Anxious and troubled about many things, and somebody help me with this, whatever it is I am doing. Are they both doing something for Jesus? Okay, so no differences.
Well, I mean, one is playing the host,
Okay,
and more of an outward service. For Martha, where Mary is more just almost like trying to be the student, just
right,
listen and learn.
Yeah. Does Martha have any doubt that what she is doing is the thing that both of them ought to be doing? That's the most important thing to be done? She's very clear on that. Who has decided that? Did she ask Jesus about that? Look, I could sit at your feet, or I could get the meal ready. What do you want me to do? She didn't ask. So that's working for God. Working for God is, I'm concerned to do something for God, but I'm going to decide what that is. So I'm going to be a successful business person, doctor, lawyer, teacher, artist, whatever it is, and then I'm going to offer that up to the Lord. I'm going to be a good Catholic, Christian, doctor, business, lawyer, accountant, whatever. That's what Martha's doing. Doing God's work is first sitting at the feet of the Lord and trying to hear what it is that the Lord wants you to do, and then doing it. So one question is our work integrated with our faith at all? The other is, even if it is, am I thinking about it from more the Martha or the Mary perspective? So when you decided to pursue whatever career you've pursued, how much did your faith have to do with it? To what extent was that a faith-based choice? Anybody tell me the ground. So reason you chose, career path you've chosen. Go ahead.
I'm a physician, and I thought that I was called to be that.
So you felt called to it. Okay. And why did you feel called to it?
I felt like I had gifts that I could give to people.
Okay.
And I didn't always want to do it, but I ought to do it.
Fantastic. We actually get to that later, time allowing, but one of the strong threads in the New Testament is that the gifts we receive, we don't receive for ourselves, we receive them for others. So to each is given a manifestation of Spirit for the common good. So the idea is to do something with your gifts that benefits others. So that's sort of rich.
Well, I was good at math and numbers.
Great.
And then there said, Joseph, hey, find your talents and develop your talents. Figure out what your talents are. And
Right.
mine, I was not going to be a great athlete, so I worked shit left instead of shit that.
Right.
And became an engineer.
Yeah. It's sometimes tricky to find out, the will of God, not in the sense of love one another and forgive as you want to be forgiven. All of that's pretty clear. But what is it that God wants you as an individual to do is kind of tricky. In the Spirituality Work course, we do a whole segment on discernment of God's Spirit and all of that. Jesuits are especially good at that. But one thing that's really, really clear is that God made each one of you to be a very unique individual with unique talents and gifts, and God wants you to flourish and grow as that unique individual. So part of learning what God's will is to take real serious attention to yourself. Who has God made you to be? What talents, gifts, passions, hopes, dreams, etc. at a really deep level, not just, making a lot of money would be nice. It would be nice to have nice stuff. That's all fine so far as it goes, but that's all kind of shallow. Just really, really deep. What do you find joy, fulfillment, satisfaction, and meaning in doing is kind of the question. So John Paul II said there shouldn't be two parallel lives, the spiritual life on the one hand and the secular life, including work and family and so forth. On the other hand, that those ought to be kind of integrated. Those ought to be one. When I was growing up, there was a priest who gave a sermon, and he ended with a little rhyme was, Mr. Johnson went to church, he never missed a Sunday, but Mr. Johnson went to hell for what he did on Monday. That's a split between the faith and work. So, I ought to be the same person in Sunday at church and in the workplace, wherever I work is the idea. But, do we sometimes have parallel lives? So, again, on a scale of 1 to 10, to what extent would you say faith and work are integrated in the lives of most people in U.S. society? So, first of all, why did you choose to do that work? Secondly, what are the values and beliefs that guide the way that you do that work, that lead you to find meaning in that work? To what extent do people experience their work as an expression of their faith? My sense is that it's fairly low. And from very, very good people of faith, just don't think about it. It's interesting, there's a lot of attention to, atheism, and usually theoretical atheism, like do you believe God exists or not. But when I was over in Rome, I studied at one of the Vatican universities, there was a lot more attention given to what's called practical atheism. And practical atheism refers to somebody who might profess a belief in God, they might even go to church, but the faith they profess makes little or no difference to the lives that they lead. So it is on a practical level, I might as well be an atheist for all the difference my faith makes to what I do and why I do it and all that kind of a thing. So the Jesuit scholar John Courtney Murray referred to an atheism of distraction. It's not that I've chosen not to believe, it's just like Martha. I'm anxious and worried about so many things, I'm thinking about those and really just not thinking about the faith thing so much. There's also a phenomenon, a lot of attention nowadays is on the group of believers. It's often said to be the largest growing group is spiritual but not religious. A fair number of my millennial students fall into that category. Very sincere seekers, but just haven't found a particular home and so forth. So I think that's an important category. But there's another category that I've never heard talked about, but I talk about, which is religious but not spiritual. And that's somebody who goes to church to kind of do all the right things, but they don't seem to have, it's ultimately up to God to decide, but so far as you can tell, don't seem to have a cultivated relationship with God. Prayer don't seem to be, to use the Old Testament term, walking with God at all. They're kind of check the box, doing what they ought to be doing, but not necessarily walking around mindful of God. One of the questions I ask is what our lives would be, what our world would be like if we devoted the same time and attention to our spiritual health that we do to our physical health. How many of you exercise on a regular basis? Almost all of you. What does it feel like if you have to go a week or two and you can't exercise? Are you pleasant to be around? I am not at all. So when you exercise and then for whatever reason for a week or two you can't do it, you feel off, feels like something is missing, right? You're not thriving the way you usually do. The challenge is kind of to get that way with our spiritual lives, to get into kind of a practice of prayer, and not just prayer. I think when you ask most people whether they pray and they say yes, what they mean is that they say prayers. My question is that's fine, that's great so far as it goes, but are you listening? Is it a kind of being silent? Psalm 46 verse 10, be still and know that I am God. So if you really know who God is, you got to be, just stop talking. Just sit there, like Mary, kind of sit there and be kind of quiet. So we don't do that. I actually gave a talk in March in Silicon Valley on solitude and leadership, the importance for leaders, especially in business, to kind of take some time apart and really think their own deeper thoughts and everything. So it's parallel. So the challenge is to kind of find that sweet spot where it becomes the spiritual life becomes so deep a part of your life that when it's not there, it feels like something is missing, and so forth. I show this picture because my beloved bride lives and works outside of Chicago, so we have a place there and a place here. This is a health club nearby where we lived in Chicago. I obviously don't spend too much time there, but this was taken about 5 years ago when we had some really brutal winters here and also in Chicago. And there were a couple of weeks where the high temperature was -5. So this is a weekday on which the high temperature is -5. And I went to the gym right after 5, right after work let out, and there wasn't an empty treadmill. So that's commitment to your physical well-being. What would it be like if we had that kind of commitment to our spiritual, intellectual well-being? I think it would be I don't, but I think it would be a very different sort of thing. So on the general question, does your work matter to God? Yes, for this reason, no, for that reason. So the God you believe in, does that God care about any aspect of the work you're doing or not? So thoughts one way or the other?
Well, I think he always cares.
Okay.
I don't know that people always see.
Kind of a caring God.
Yeah, I don't know that people always see a connection. So I think if people are really kind of committed to their work and they really believe in what they're doing, they might sense that more. But But if people are doing, like, sort of a routine job and they don't feel like getting much fulfillment out of it, they may not see that.
Okay. Well, I wanted to get to this question of, do you have a job or a career or a calling? The job, you need the paycheck, kind of what most of us did in high school or college. You get spending money and all of that. The career is a deeper level of commitment. You have a sense of progressing along kind of a career path and doing better and better. And the calling is like your life work. It's like why you are here. And if you won the lottery, you would still do what it is that you're doing, just because you find that you're intrinsically motivated to do it and so forth. But the question relevant to your comment, what made me think about that, is do you need to be like a heart surgeon or creating a life-saving drug or a social worker or, Bill Gates trying to cure diseases in the world to have a calling?
I read a story once about a woman who had been a maid in a hotel for like 40 years.
Okay.
And she took tremendous pride in having the cleanest rooms,
Right.
the best made beds,
Yeah.
things of that nature. So she was really committed to that work, even though
Right.
a lot of people would say, well, it's kind of a low job.
Yeah. And, and again, to the best of our knowledge, Jesus spent more than half the time he was among us as a carpenter. There were doctors and all that kind of, there were wealthy merchants. He was not one of them. He was a carpenter, which is, a perfectly fine thing to be, but it's not kind of a big impressive thing to be, and a carpenter in a small town at that. So when I was a Jesuit, I spent some time working as a nurse's aide in a terminal cancer hospital in New York, where the average stay was 40 to 60 days, and nobody ever went home in the history of the place, including my mom's dad. And you have to have exhausted all avenues of medical treatment to be admitted. So nobody was going home from that place. And the administrators and the doctors always told the janitors, you are part of the healthcare team. They said, on the one hand, these people have very low defenses. So if they're in a dirty room and pick up some kind of bug infection, whatever, they can't fight it and they'll die even sooner and more unpleasantly. So it really does matter that their rooms are clean. On the other hand, you're often in the rooms longer than the doctors are, and that's the human interaction. So treat it as that. Ask them how they're doing. If there's a picture on a nightstand, ask them who that is and how they're doing. If they want a glass of water, give them a glass of water, etc. Do you think that changed the way those janitors saw their work? Do you think they probably did their work even better?
I think it's very important. Every job is important. And as a nurse in a hospital, everybody in the hospital's job is very important. And I used to tell the housekeepers, you are first line of defense for infection control.
They really are.
That's a very important
Right.
job. And if you bring that to their attention, I think they pay more attention to what they're doing and feel part of that team rather than being at the lowest end of the totem pole.
Right. Right. Yeah, no, I think that is absolutely correct. So to me, I think to me that could be having a calling if you really understand your work. So, on one hand, the question is what work you do. The other question, though, is why do you do it? What motivates you to do it? What leads you to find meaning or satisfaction in it? And I think too much attention is paid to the what and not so much the why. Because somebody could be a heart surgeon and not have a calling, right? If their concern is to make as much money as possible or to be the most renowned heart surgeon they can be, then that's not a calling. If their concern is not to restore people to health and to their loved ones, then it's not a calling. So a janitor can have a calling and a heart surgeon might not. It kind of depends why. This, for instance, John Paul II used to talk about the difference between the objective dimension of work, the kind of what do you do, and the subjective dimension, the kind of why do you do it. There's a story told to illustrate the difference between those two dimensions of somebody who comes across 3 bricklayers at work and asks each one in turn, what are you doing? And the first one says, I'm earning $20 an hour. And the second one says, I'm putting these bricks side by side with mortar between them to hold them securely in place. And the third one says, I'm building a cathedral. Are they doing the same work? Objective dimension, they're doing exactly the same thing. Subjective dimension, they're experiencing it very differently. They're doing it for very different reasons. When I went from being a Jesuit to being a corporate attorney, you have to write an entrance essay for law school, and my essay was that law empowers you to serve. There are individuals, organizations, communities that are, heavily beset by legal problems. I can help them address those problems, and that's what makes it worthwhile. So it's that whole, did everybody I worked with have that same attitude toward it? No, but that was my reason for doing it. So the why you do it matters a lot too. So what are some reasons God might care about the work that you do? What is it about that work that could matter to God?
I think God's more concerned not about what you do, but how you do it. You're born, I've been blessed with many gifts to become a physician or surgeon. And I worked very hard up until about 50 years old.
Right.
And I had my first and second strokes.
Oh, sorry.
And I could have kept on working the way I did and die sometime soon and be very successful, but God must have had a different plan for me. He said, you got to rethink your attitude about where's your journey going. The journey is to get to heaven.
Right.
And I can be very successful in this world, but am I being successful in the next world? And that's when I shifted my intention to what's important about me as a soul, as a person, not as a surgeon. And that's the reason and Dante's
Inferno.
all of his books are about going through this life, learning, improving, and getting to heaven.
Right.
And I'm trying to find the best version of myself.
Right.
What do I do that really matters, not to just one thing, but to all things?
Right.
And that's what I'm trying to do.
Okay.
That's why I'm here.
So what God cares more about is the why that you do it, that it's done. Remember the Mother Teresa line, the importance is not to do great things, but to do things with great love. It's that kind of, that I think is relevant to that. So that's great. That's brilliant. Yes?
In my younger years, I had a very conditional, okay, God, I'm going to please you, I'm going to serve you,
Right.
and you're going to be pleased with me, I get my crown in heaven. And as I get older, I realize there's more unconditionality about what I do. If you told me today you're not going to do that anymore, like the gentleman was saying here, if you told me that 10 years ago, I would have been so stuck in that identity because that's how God's going to love me back because I did this for him. But
Right.
sometimes I hear him laughing at me like, silly rabbit, you don't have to do that. I'm going to love you anyway.
Yeah.
And so as I get older, just trying to figure out, okay, well then what does that look like in my day-to-day life?
Right. This picture I have here, my Bible, is actually Rembrandt's portrait of the Return of the Prodigal Son, which a lot of people say is the gospel in miniature. If you had one passage that sums up the whole message, that's it. And it has to do with unconditional love. Because what's interesting is that, there are the two sons, and the one takes his share of the wealth and goes off and squanders it and so forth. The other son is loyal and good and stays there and all that kind of a thing. And both, and when the one who had went off comes back, the father, runs down the road and hugs him, kisses him, which actually, for an elder person in that culture, is kind of an undignified thing to do, but he didn't care, so happy about it, and throws a big celebration. And then the older son's not happy about that, right? He's kind of angry, and I've been here the whole time. You haven't thrown a big celebration for me, and all of that. And anybody remember where the elder son is at the end of the story? Does he join in the celebration? No, he's standing outside the celebration, refuses to enter into it, is it. So what's interesting to me about the story is that both sons assume that their father's love is conditional. But the younger one assumes it's conditional and I haven't met the conditions, therefore I'm not worthy to be called the son. The older one assumes it's conditional and I have met the conditions, therefore I'm the one who should be celebrated for that. But both of them miss is that the Father's love is unconditional. The Father's love because the Father is loving. You know, you're not powerful enough to turn off that loving part of it, kind of a thing. And I think that to really truly believe that is like one of the most liberating insights I think we can get in life. And then you stop doing things in order to get whatever. You do it out of gratitude and so forth. On the getting to heaven, by the way, I gave a talk once at Boston College on building a resume for the company of saints. And I was talking to students and I was saying, you know, you all work very hard to build your resume for whatever company it is that you want to work for, company or other organization. So I need to make sure I have this on the resume, get these grades, those activities, and so forth. Are we doing anything similar in terms of getting into the company of saints? Kind of, you know, what is it you want to have on the resume of your life? What is it that you did, accomplished, et cetera, when you get to that point is something to think about. C.S. Lewis, though, the great Anglican spiritual writer, said that God cares less what we do and more that we become a certain kind of person. So more that you're a person of faith and hope and love, more that you take on the mind and the heart of Christ, that matters more than what you do for a living. And so forth. Again, I mean, Jesus spent more than half his life working as a carpenter. We said in our society we attach this really high importance to work. How much importance did he attach to that? My best guess is he probably did it very responsibly, probably did a very good job of it, but it was not his reason for being. You know, Luke was a physician, Paul was a tent maker, so he wasn't a burden on communities he worked for. They all, you know, Abraham and Moses were shepherds. I mean, there's lots of examples where they had work, but it didn't define them at all. So from a biblical perspective, work is important, but not all important. I think in our society, sometimes it can feel all important, and that's kind of a difference. So all of that, the kind of person you are and meaning and so forth, matters. In terms of kind of person you are, John Paul II was fond of saying that through our work, we shape the world we live in. So the world we live in is not a given the way we find it. It is the way it is because of lots of work done by a lot of people over millennia, really. So that's kind of obvious. But the other thing he would say is that, and our work in turn shapes us. So our work in certain ways shapes who we are as people. When I practiced corporate law once, I walked down a hallway to visit a friend of mine who was a young litigation attorney. And when I walked into her office, she was just getting off of a really nasty phone call with somebody on the other side of some case, and she was saying some not very Christian things to him. She was Catholic. And she hung up the phone, looked at me, and she said, "I've become a she-devil." Anyway, so that was not a good shaping in her experience. John Pepper, former chairman, CEO of Procter & Gamble, wrote a book called What Really Matters. And he said that when he left the Navy and started working at P&G, originally he was focused on himself, his own career, trajectory, and all of that. But he was surrounded by so many people who seemed to be genuinely focused on the customer that he too started to be more focused on the customer. So that's an example of a positive shaping, kind of, you know, helping you get your nose out of your navel. So a question I have to ask you, whatever work you either are doing, or for those who retire, whatever work you did do, in what ways did that shape you for better or worse? So the question is, you know, you at the beginning of your career, you wherever you are now, or at the end of your career, how has that shaped you as a person? Has that made you more a person of faith, hope, love, or less of one? That's kind of the question, right? Fruits of the Spirit. That's the Jesuit discernment. Fruits of the Spirit, peace, joy, love, tranquility, all of those. So we know we're kind of abiding in the Spirit when we experience those fruits. So do I experience the fruits of the Spirit more or less than when I began my career? Is the question. So, any thoughts? I found when I practiced corporate law, I had a different attitude toward time. Because you track your time to the 10th of an hour. So when you're out having lunch with a friend, I'm thinking, how many tenths of an hour am I spending on this lunch? And I'm going to need to make it up tonight, tomorrow morning sometime. You kind of, in some ways that makes it more efficient and so forth. It's helpful, but in other ways, not socially helpful. So, anyway, so has your work shaped you for better, for worse, or been sort of indifferent?
Well, I think mine is, it has shaped me for better.
Okay. In what ways?
If nothing else, it's improved my patience.
Okay.
I think you learn to be more patient when you have to deal with different personalities and different customers, different internal people.
Yes.
So I do IT work, and we make.
So it sounds like not different wonderful personalities.
But I do IT work, and we build emergency 911 systems. And
Okay.
so it's work that I feel like we're helping people who really need help.
Good.
And there's a lot of people who have come to work in that group and then gone somewhere else for a while, and then they come back.
Okay.
And it's because we really like the mission of serving people who need help. So in that way, I think it's made me, probably focus a little bit less on like career objectives and more to the kind of mission that we're serving.
Okay, good. Okay. Excellent. My suggestion then is that one of the reasons that your work does matter to God is that to one extent or another, your work shapes who you are as a person. So God cares what kind of person you become. Work has something to do with that. For better or worse, I would say it's pretty much never irrelevant to the kind of person you are. Who are you surrounded by? What do you care about? What are you focused on? All of that is shaped by work. The culture that you live in, the work culture you live in has a shaping effect, I think. So that's one thing to pay attention to there. Oh, okay. Any other thoughts on that general question? Or should we move on? Other ways your work matters to God?
I would say my background is in orthopedic sales.
Great.
Trauma specifically, and as life kind of giving or correcting as that may have been at the time, I think that it was not very fulfilling ultimately, and I felt there was more that I could be doing for my clients, patients, customers. And it's now a complete 180. I'm now a financial advisor. And so, and that is incredibly life-giving. And I think that, that is, from personal experience, anecdotal situations, but seen so many people that, have gone through major life events, some very enriching, some devastating. And so to be really present and so intentional in the decision-making that I'm partaking in and my team is doing for our clients,
Right.
I think is driving sort of the good that we're going for, and knowing that we're hoping to be working with these families for the rest of their lives, but really understanding and listening to their needs is exciting and comes from really a place of genuine compassion in an industry that obviously can not seem that way, and I've always had that reputation. So it's, it's in that education process as well that I think, to me, that gives me a lot of motivation to know that the work we're doing, that I'm trying to do, is so intentional.
Okay.
And for sort of the very best interest for who we're working with. So.
Okay. So it sounds like your transition from orthopedic sales to financial services is finding a calling, given. Now, would you say that everybody you know who does financial services has a calling?
Yeah, I think my motivations for getting in financial services was, I guess, a couple years out too. I knew what I didn't want to do in financial services, and so
Okay.
I think
That's great.
narrowing down that field was pretty, again, intentional.
That's great.
Why would I want to enter financial services? It was
Right.
pretty specific, and it was
Okay.
really to work with those individuals and families
Okay.
on a very intimate level. So, and
Fantastic.
so then, what in finance can I do? It was advisory was a pretty big calling for me.
No, that's great. And you mentioned the industry is often not seen that way. I've been asked to create a new course on ethics and finance for the Master's of Science and Finance program that Notre Dame started downtown in Chicago. So I'll be teaching that this coming fall. So I asked selfishly in part, I'm just thinking about what to include in that. But relevant to your observation, I had a discussion in an MBA ethics class a couple of years ago about the difference between job, career, and calling and all that kind of thing. And one of the students came up to me after class and said, that was really an interesting discussion, and I've always wanted to find a calling, but I decided I'm going to go into financial services instead. And I was saying, well, that can absolutely be a calling. Again, kind of, why are you intentional? Why do you do it? And I pointed out, I'm the tail end of the baby boomer generation. I said that the percentage of our generation that is financially set up for retirement is like really alarming. And there are a lot of us. so that's a problem for us. It's a problem for society when you get a lot of people who aren't set up for retirement and are living a lot longer and all of that. So I said, if you can help, us or people of any generation make investment decisions as a result of which they can provide for themselves and their loved ones throughout their lives and in their old age, can that be an act of love? From a Christian sense, absolutely. Can that be a calling? Absolutely. Of a slide later, it's interesting in Catholic social teaching, they have this talk about what makes management, but it's true for financial services as well, a calling and not a job or a career. And the key consideration is it done with a concern for the common good? So if you're, whatever work you're doing it, if you're doing it with a focus on how it's good for you, so heart surgeon, how I can make the most money possible, gain the most renown possible, then it's not a calling. But if financial services or a janitor and you're doing it with a concern for benefit of others, then that's a calling. That's kind of the key thing. So who are you thinking about? I mean, the central commandment in Christianity is love, right? Love your neighbor as yourself, and love each other the way I've loved you, and all of that. I mean, if you reflect on the nature of Christian love, Jesus says we should love our enemies. So what kind of love is it possible to command people to do? And in what sense can you love enemies? Can you have the same warm, fuzzy feelings about your enemies that you do about, your best friend, your significant other, your children, anybody else? Probably not. But C.S. Lewis points out that it's learning to have the attitude toward others that we naturally have toward ourselves. Because there are times when we're not happy with ourselves, but when we don't like ourselves. But even at those times, we still wish the best for ourselves. So the sense in which you can love your enemy or anybody is to wish the best for them, to actively seek the best for them, not just wish it, but actively do something. So to the extent you are actively doing something out of a genuine, intentional concern for other people, that's the vocation of Christian love. Whatever the work. It could be a cook. Could be a dishwasher, which is what I was in high school and college, whatever it is there. So it's interesting, we mentioned we're not getting a very strong message from the pulpit that work matters from a faith perspective. It's interesting in the Catholic tradition that the problem is not the teaching. The teaching is like really, really strong on the importance of work. The problem is, the packaging of that teaching and getting the message out there. So this is from one of the Vatican II documents. So laity by the very vocation seek the kingdom of God by engaging in temporal affairs and ordering them according to the plan of God. So we'll say Mass, all you've got to do is order temporal affairs according to the plan of God. Good luck with that. And then in doing that, they work for the sanctification of the world from within as a leaven. So laity is kind of a leaven, helping bring out the kingdom of God. Pretty good stuff in terms of the importance of the work that laity do. This one, lay apostolate, is participation in the saving mission of the church itself through the baptism, confirmation. All are commissioned for that apostolate by the Lord himself. So the idea is that anybody who's baptized and confirmed ought to be doing something for the Lord. Is it? You can decide what that is, but it ought to be something that you're doing for the Lord. Continues, laity are called in a special way to make the church present and operative in those places and circumstances where only through them can she become the salt of the earth. So Jesus taught us, one prayer, and that includes your kingdom come, your will be done. And the kingdom comes to the extent God's will is done. So Jesus wanted that done kind of throughout the world, and wanted believers to be sort of the salt of the earth. What this is saying is that there are certain places, Jesus wants the kingdom established everywhere. Certain places where popes and bishops and priests and sisters and lay ministers and ministers are just not going to be there to make something happen. So it's either going to happen as a result of what lay people in that workplace, that home, are doing or not. Is kind of it. So it's interesting. When I first graduated from law school, I worked in a largely Jewish law firm in Chicago, like 600 attorneys. And my Jewish friends called me the Jewish leprechaun for being their Irish Catholic friend who studied Hebrew. So anyway, but I found that a lot of people of lots of different faiths, they kind of knew my background. They would stop by when somebody died, they wondered what happens, and a meaning thing, whatever, they'd stop by and talk about it just because maybe they didn't have a very good relationship with a priest or minister or rabbi, but Joe cares about this and knows something about it, so I'll go talk with him. So that's just kind of a place where there just weren't any clergy there to sort of answer the questions that people had. So you're either there with something to offer or you're not, is kind of the thing. So here's one. It's actually in the Catholic Catechism as well, but Pope Pius II originally said it. Pope John Paul II included it in one of his encyclicals as well. Lay believers are the front line of the church. So I love this line. That's a powerful one. So was anybody here when Lou Holtz was here? Okay. So Lou Holtz, when he first arrived, talked about mash face football. So we're not going to do any trick plays, flea flickers, whatever. We're going to line up against them, and the ball's going to be snapped, and we're going to push them further back than they push us, and just mash face. So like here, we're going up against USC. So but that would be good in the front line. So my suggestion is, lay believers are the front line of the church. That's an example of mash face faith. So, we believers are going to kind of line up here, and there are some competing values and beliefs in the world. We're going to line up against them. We're going to try and push them back further than they push us. That's kind of the thing. That is that kind of daily tension, daily struggle in life. What's interesting is that for most Catholics, and I dare say most Christians in general, being a lay person is something that you end up being. It's kind of like, when we pray for vocations, what are we praying for? Priesthood, the convent, etc. And all that is fine and good, but, those are not the only vocations. It's kind of the thing. We're not praying for any other kind of it. So the idea is that if you're really serious about your faith, to become a priest or a sister or a minister, the rest of us end up lay people because we didn't choose to be that. So it's just what we are because we didn't make the other choice. Make any sense? So this is from Peter Culvenbach, was the general superior of the Jesuits a number of years ago. And he was saying that, men and women find meaning by bringing about the reign of God. They choose a way of life that's going to help them to serve God. They choose to be laymen or lay women. He goes on to say that being lay ought not to be a state of life that results from not making a choice, concrete possibility one chooses to realize the will of God. So be intentional. Be intentional about being a layperson. Same thing, by the way, with as a layperson, am I going to be married, not married, a parent, not a parent? Same thing. Just, what is going to enable me to serve God, be kind of person God wants me to be, and all of that is sort of the question. That to me would be a game changer if people just became more kind of intentional about that. By the way, one of the titles for the Pope is Servant of the Servants of God. So the idea is that I, the Pope, serve you in order that you might better serve others. But again, front line of the church, what ultimately matters is that you serve others. Everything we're doing is to help you do that. Make any sense? So it kind of all boils down to that. Anyway, on the job, career, calling, we've talked about that. Question I want to ask about that is, what percentage of people, based on your experience wherever you worked, would you say have a calling rather than a job or career? Where would you put that number? What?
I'm just saying, in nursing, from what I'm seeing today, 50% have a call.
50? Okay. Yeah, I've never heard that high. That's good. 50% of a calling. Anybody else where you work?
I would say probably 50 or maybe even a little bit more, but for the group I work in, I don't know if that would be true like company-wide.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else?
I can say about 10% because I work with a group of millennials. It's more like first, second jobs out at college.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're saying more like
Yeah.
10%? Usually, so 50 is, that's encouraging to me. Most times when I have this discussion, like with the MBA students, they say it's more like 10. Some say even less than that, but most would say a minority. In any event, not a big majority, if majority at all. So whatever the percentage is, my question is this. The people who don't have a calling, is that because they looked for a calling and didn't find one? Or is that because they didn't look for one in the first place? And I don't have data, you don't have data. I'm asking for kind of your gut sense. So people who don't have a calling because they looked for one, didn't find it, or didn't look in the first place?
I think when you have a calling, it's within you. I really think, like, I'll just use your nursing as my idea, but as a child, as a teenager, I knew that I always wanted to be a nurse. I cared about people. I wanted to help people. I think to be a nurse, you have to really have a caring heart about people.
Right.
Because if you go into nursing just because of money, you're going to be very disappointed.
Right.
So I think, you should know whether that's your calling or not.
Okay. But the hours are fabulous, right? Okay, so you should, well, that's why you should go into it. I'm asking what people do or don't, yeah.
I have a question back at you with that, like, because you work, I think you work with younger people, and we have a millennial son, and it's hard for me to relate to him as he's going through college and trying to figure out what he's doing, because I don't know if he sees it as looking for a calling or looking for just a career. You know what I'm saying? Like, how do you feel the young people are looking at that?
My experience is that the majority are not looking at that. I mean, I think they're concerned to be happy. I think that they won't put up with a lot of stuff that a lot of us put up with. And I say God bless them for that. I think there's a lot of wisdom in their point of view, and I really kind of appreciate and respect that. If they're like miserable, they'll just kind of move on to someplace else, which is wise, I think, and sane, and all of that. So I think most of them don't, and I think in having had discussions with them for a lot of years about it, they're not encouraged to. They're encouraged to do either something that other people will find impressive or something that will earn a lot of money and enable you to have a certain lifestyle or whatever. They're encouraged to do that. They're not encouraged to kind of look deep into your heart and, of all the things you've done, what is the thing that most energizes you? What are the thing you're most engaged in? I was asked by a group of undergraduates once, how do you choose the right major? And I said, a lot goes into that, and some of it, there's an element of practicality. You're going to have to pay bills and put food on your table and all of that. But I said the question I would ask is, would you ever read a book in the subject area if it weren't required? If the answer to that question is no, then you are majoring in something that you do not find interesting. And having majored in that for 4 years, you are most likely to go on to a job that you do not find interesting as well. So. But I think the answer is that a lot of people don't. I mean, I ask the question sometimes, if you won the lottery tomorrow or got a sudden, unexpected, large inheritance, would you stay on the same career path you're now on? And the vast majority of students I've worked with said, no, not at all. So to me, that would indicate that probably not your calling, probably not your life work. My answer to that question is yes. I would do exactly what I'm doing now. Don't tell the dean. I would do it for nothing. if I could, just because to me it feels like, my wife says that, I love the summer now and I have a lot of free time, but come the end of the summer, I'm like a kid standing alone on a playground bouncing a ball, wondering when the other kids are going to come back so we can play. I kind of miss it. Doesn't feel like work and so forth. So that's what I would say. I also encourage the students to have a conversation with anybody, but a lot of them choose their parents or older brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, just other people they know. Talk to that person about their work, and do they consider it a job, career calling? Why? If they had it to do all over again, would they do it differently? And what I have found is that comfortably over 90% of the students have never had that conversation with either of their parents. So more than 90% have never spoken with their parents about what their parents spend most of their waking hours doing, and why they do it, which is interesting to me. I have a friend who's a rabbi, and she said they have a practice in their congregation called leaving an ethical will. A lot of times when we talk about a will, it's kind of what you're passing on financially, and that matters, but the ethical will is really a statement of what you're passing on in terms of values, beliefs, all of that. So if you went in, why did you choose career path? What led you to find satisfaction in it? What are the values that guided your work? Is whatever you were doing. It's kind of articulating that, passing that on as well. Because he talked about having the heart stroke back there, working so hard for so long. I think in our society, a lot of times when people are working a lot, I often ask them, why are you doing that? Most common answer, to provide for my loved ones. I say that's great, and I assume that's sincere, but when we say provide for my loved ones, usually we mean financially. And that's important, it's very important. But there are other ways in which we ought to provide for our loved ones as well, like providing yourself, happy, healthy, whole, and all of that kind of matters. Providing a you that comes through the door kind of hopeful and energized instead of discouraged and kind of beaten down, and all of that matters as well, I think. So. Yeah. Okay, here's what makes the management of vocation. So commitment to the public good, not simply the private good of their firms or managers, but the same insight applies to others. Here's the section we talked about gifts before. So this is kind of a strong thread in the New Testament. The first verse is more known. The second one, I think, is actually richer. So as each received a gift, employ it from another as good stewards of God's varied grace. So exercise stewardships over the gifts that you have. It's interesting, one of the 7 deadly sins is sloth. And usually when we think about sloth, we think about a lizard on a rock kind of not doing anything. And that's one of the meanings of it. But there's a deeper meaning. And the parable of the talents in Matthew 25, remember that the master gives 3 servants the talents, the coins, which are called talents at the time. One gets 5, one gets 3, one gets 1, etc. And the first 2 kind of do something with their talents, and they earn more with it, and they give that to the master when he comes back. And the third one does what? Anybody remember in this story? Buries it. Just kind of buries it. By the way, there's Jewish tradition at that time where that was actually a responsible thing to do. It was a way of like safeguarding what you've been entrusted to you and making sure it doesn't get stolen and all that. So it's not like that was a horrible thing to do, but the response is, you wicked and slothful servant. So why calling the servant slothful? The deeper meaning of sloth is that there is something that God wanted you to do with the talents you've received, and you haven't done it. Doesn't mean you're a lizard on a rock. You might be very busy. You might be doing a lot of other things, but you're not doing the one thing that God most wants you to be doing. You're not using the talent that God entrusted to you to do something with. Does that make any sense? So does anybody know anybody who kind of just sits on their gifts? That's sloth. That's an example of that in this kind of a deeper sense. This we're not going to have time for. What I wanted to get to, it's just interesting to reflect on what are the values and beliefs you experience in the workplace, what are the values and beliefs you hold as a person of faith, where is there harmony, where is there tension, where is there conflict between those values. I think you'll find instances of all 3, but that's the world in which we're trying to live out our faith in and through our work is that world. So it's kind of good to do a survey of kind of what's helping you and what's impeding you in that effort. So in Christianity and Catholicism in particular, there's this universal call to holiness, right? And the question is, what is holiness? A lay theologian, Frank Sheed, described it as a proper channeling of one's energy. So when all of your energy is devoted toward loving God with all your heart and your neighbor as yourself, that's the result of holiness. When your energy is kind of all over the place, that is not holiness. Someone like St. Augustine led a very kind of lively life before his conversion. He had a concubine, he had a child with her. He famously prayed when he was being converted, "Lord, make me chaste, but not yet." That was somebody with a lot of energy, but it was not channeled in the direction of serving God and the people of God. After his conversion, it was, and led him to become a saint. So it's kind of, what do I do not only with my gifts and talents, what do I do with my energy is kind of the question there. And in a letter that the Catholic bishops wrote on the U.S. economy, they said the road to holiness for most of us lies in our secular vocations. So we need a spirituality that supports lay initiative and witness, not just in churches, but also in business, labor movement, etc. There's a distinction in Catholic thought between ministry and mission. And ministry is work that's done within the community of the church in order to build up the community of the church. So becoming a Eucharistic minister, teaching CCD, teaching pre-Cana, all of that is ministry. And all that's good and important. But mission is what the church does in the world. And the proper role of laity is mission. Mission is that specific role to be, the leaven in the world and salt of the earth and all that kind of a good stuff. So this is saying we need a spirituality that focuses on that. Again, I think a problem many churches make is to encourage people, if you're really devoted parishioner, then you become involved in like church life. And that's true. There's some good to that, but there's not a message about, you really do something with what you receive on Sunday, Monday to Friday is not so strong a message. Somebody asked me when I left the Jesuits and became a corporate attorney, how do you maintain your faith? Because when I was a Jesuit, I lived in a house all the time that had a chapel like down the hallway. I had a spiritual director who lived in the same house, and we met every week or two. I had an 8-day silent retreat every year. In a lot of ways, there were a lot of supports to living out your faith. In a lot of ways, it was easier. When I'm a corporate attorney on my own in a largely Jewish law firm working 12, 14, 16 hours a day, it's a very different sort of a challenge. So I said, to me, the challenge to live out my faith in those different circumstances was like Peter walking on the water. So remember, Peter and the other apostles were out in the boat in the lake in the middle of the night. It was all dark. There was a storm. They were afraid. They think they see Jesus on the water. And Peter says, if it's you, call me to come out to you. And Jesus does call him to come out to him. So Peter gets out of the boat and starts walking toward him. I always say there are two categories of believers, those who would and those who would not have gotten out of that boat. By the way, the first time I water skied, I was thinking of this passage. Oh, this is what it's like. It's kind of cool. Anyway, so Peter's doing fine. He's walking on the water. But when he stops looking at Jesus and he starts looking at the wind and the waves and becomes afraid, then he starts sinking and says, Lord, save me. And Jesus reaches out his hand and raises him up and so forth. So to me, walking on water is something that Peter was not capable of his own. He did not have the ability to do that. But so long as he remained focused on the Lord, then he could do that. But once he stopped focusing on the Lord and instead focused on what he was up against, the wind, the waves, etc., then he kind of went down. So how do you live out your faith in and through your work? Kind of this thing that focused on the Lord, I think, enables us to do that. So they're fond of saying, go Irish around here. Today I will say, go Irish, walk on the water. Thank you very much.